So today, the amazing Miss Leslie Dixon will be speaking today on the topic, why do periods happen? Ms. Dixon is the CEO and Executive Director of the company Birds and Bees Connections. She's taught thousands of classes and shared her unique comprehensive parent and child programs with thousands of couples throughout Orange and Los Angeles counties. Ms. Dixon's courses meet the need for connection and communication between parents and children, especially in times of profound transition such as adolescence. Having 25 years of having spent 25 years as a school nurse teaching family life, health science, and sex ed, she continually saw the effects of parent and child disconnection. She founded the Birds and Bees Connection in 2002 to bridge the gap between and offer tools, information, connection, empowering parents to be a positive and engaged presence in their children's lives. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone to keep their microphones on mute throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and one of my associate directors will read them out loud for Ms. Dixon at the end of the presentation. And now I present to you Ms. Dixon, Ms. Leslie Dixon.
Let me make sure. Thank you, Maylene. What you have done is absolutely amazing. So I welcome everybody to this symposium. I'm so excited to be sharing some information about what a period is. As Maylene said, I have been an educator for over 35 years, teaching the topic about puberty and periods, and it's been an amazing journey. Everybody has such amazing questions and curiosities about this topic. So in my classrooms, oftentimes I will ask the girls two questions. One, if they know a little bit about puberty, and two, if they know a little bit about getting their periods. And in most cases, they'll sort of raise their hand for both. And then I say to them, are you excited about getting either puberty or your periods? And in most cases, they say their hands go down, they never raise their hand, and they all giggle. So really my job has always been to educate young women and parents about the topic of not only puberty, but periods as well. So it's important to understand what that means. So what I'd like to do is ask you a couple of questions. How many here, so you can put it in the chat, how many here have taken some form of a puberty class? Or you can actually put your thumbs up because I can see some of your thumbs. How many of you are comfortable going to your moms about this topic? Yes or no? Thumbs up, thumbs down. And really what this is about is to help you feel comfortable. So my topic is really what periods are and what's their purpose. And I could probably tell you that pretty quickly, but instead I'm going to lead you on a journey about what periods are. And to do that, you have to understand your anatomy. So that's what I'm going to do now. Oh, I have to share. No, it's gone. I was going to share my screen, but I made it go away. Give me a second and I will get that back again. Maybe. I removed it. Hold on. You know technology, and here it is, everyone. I had it perfectly, and now I lost it. So hold on for a second. And if you have questions, give me any questions you might have about puberty or about periods, and I will look for, wait a minute, I know, PowerPoint. I'm sorry. There. Okay. Aileen, can they see the screen?
I can see the screen, yes.
Can everyone see the screen, do you think? Yes. Yeah, good job. Okay, sorry about that. It was all set up and I pressed the wrong button. So one of the questions I always ask is, where do most people think that babies grow inside a woman's body? And as a rule, what I get is your stomach. If you don't know where your stomach is, it's way up. And so that's not where babies grow. Babies grow inside the uterus, which is down in your pelvis. So here's your first assignment. I want all women, all girls to find their pelvises. I literally want you to find your hips and find your pelvis and sort of feel around and feel what it feels like. Well, that's really important. That's where babies grow. And your pelvises are wider because that's the space that babies are going to need to grow. So here's the anatomy. So for women, we have our reproductive organs inside of our body. And all this really leads to the discussion about what periods are. So inside of our body, we have something called the uterus. I think most girls have heard about that. Uterus is made of a muscle. Muscles expand and they contract. And inside the uterus, it's hollow or empty. And before you reach puberty, the sides of your uterus are very, very thin. Here comes the reason why you get your period. So as you get closer to puberty and to get your period, and there's a couple of really good signs. One, getting hair. Two, getting breast buds. And usually once you get breast buds, your period comes 2 years from to that point. So at that point, when those things start to happen, the lining of your uterus gets thicker. And the whole purpose of that thickness inside your uterus is just in case there's a pregnancy. And the lining is made up of tissue, very important nutrients, and red blood cells. And those red blood cells are going to play a very important part in just a second. So at the beginning of life, you're called an embryo. And the first couple of weeks that you implant in the lining of the uterus, that nutrients that I just mentioned, the cells, the nutrients, the fluid, and the red blood cells are what allows you to survive. So that lining is really the first nutrients, food for you at the very beginning of life. Obviously, most months you're not going to be pregnant. So that lining needs to shed, and it leaves the sides of the uterus, and it leaves through your vagina, obviously. So one of the other questions I always say to my girls in my class are, what if you never took a class? What if you never knew about puberty or periods or what was going to happen to you when you went to the bathroom and you looked down at your underwear and you saw blood? And more than half of the girls that I talked to all thought they were dying, that they were scared because they didn't know what was really happening to them. And so that's why education about what literally is happening to your body, which is so amazing, is so important. The other concern I always get is I'm bleeding. That when I get my period, I'm bleeding. And you're not bleeding, because if you think about bleeding, you think about a cut or an injury. And what is happening when that lining sheds? Ooh. Where did it go to? Sorry. When that lining sheds, what it is, it's the red blood cells, it's all those nutrients. And when they hit the air, there is blood in it, but you are not bleeding. That's very, very important. But I want to really stress that that lining that becomes your period is probably one of the most powerful nutrients that our body as women can produce. In fact, in the American Indian culture, way back when, they would take that half a cup, and that's usually what a period is, about a half a cup in total, and they would put it back into the soil because they knew those nutrients were so powerful. Okay, so that's the uterus, and that's all part of a cycle. And the fancy term for your period is menstruation. Most of us wouldn't want to walk around going, well, I'm menstruating today. That's why I think we created the word period. If you shorten menstruation, it's Latin for the moon. And the moon has a cycle, you're going to have a cycle. Moon has a cycle, 28 to 31 days. Most times, girls, once you regulate, you're going to have a cycle that same time, anywhere between 28 to 31 days. Halfway through that cycle, what happens is you have something called ovulation. Ovulation is you've got these two organs called ovaries. All right, here's something else I want you to demonstrate. I want you to show me, those that I can see, make little eyes. I want you all to make little eyes. Good job. And those eyes are about the size of your ovaries, not in your eyes. Down. I want you to put them down in your pelvis. Take your eyes and put them down in your pelvis. No, Sophie, down in your pelvis. Good job. Okay, that's where your ovaries are. Inside your ovaries are ovum, not like chickens. These are very, very, very special little eggs. And they're important because somewhere down the line, when you're married and you're ready to have babies, that part of your anatomy, those tiny little eggs, are all the DNA from the female side of the family. When you're born, you were born with 500,000 tiny little eggs. Right after your period, what happens is a bunch of those eggs start to mature, but there's only, as a rule, one winner. So what happens is one of those ovaries literally opens up and spits out an egg. I think it makes that noise. And you see these little finger projections, they're called fimbria. They're attached to your fallopian tubes. That's your transportation system for the egg. The egg gets released and it gets sent into the fallopian tubes. Now, everything that happens to you for two reasons. One, because of hormones. All right, so I'm going to say these two hormones. One is estrogen and one is progesterone. Now, I can't hear you, but some of you, I can see your mouths. I want you to all say estrogen. Can you all say estrogen? You're laughing. Good job. And then I want you to say progesterone. And you have to have both of them because that's what helps to create your period. And they're so important. And they also help to create breasts and getting taller, all the things that happen to your body. So hormones are really, really important. So the egg is released and it's sent into the fallopian tubes. If you really want to say a funny word, say fallopian tubes, and then use your hands to say it too. It's pretty funny. It goes into your fallopian tubes, and then two things happen. Remember, I said two things have to happen. One, you have to have hormones, and two, you have to have, which is really important, just the fact that your body works on its own. So the egg gets put into the fallopian tube, and now one of two things happen. If the woman is pregnant, which obviously isn't most of the time, then the egg just dissolves in 24 hours. Okay? If you are pregnant, which isn't most of the time, if you are pregnant, then it sends a special hormone to the uterus not to have a baby, not to have a period. Sorry, not to have a period, not the baby either. So I'll repeat that again. If the egg is there and there's a pregnancy, it will send a hormone to the uterus, which is so important not to have the period, because there's a pregnancy coming, and the pregnancy needs to implant in the uterus, and all those nutrients need to be there to make sure that embryo, those first 3 weeks, grows and is healthy and survives. A pregnancy can't happen. This is why you get your period. A pregnancy can't happen unless that lining is there. And that lining won't be there without those hormones, which means you have to enter puberty. What happens is the lining really does slough off or shed off the side, and then it leaves your body. Now, it leaves your body through an organ called the vagina. And oftentimes in my classes, when I say that word, I see the girls get a little uncomfortable. They sort of have this old impression that that part of our anatomy isn't very clean. It's very clean. It's probably one of the cleanest parts of our body. It is hollow and it has cells. And every 3 days, those cells shed and new cells come. So it's one of the cleanest parts of our body. It's also called the birth canal. So that is why we get our period. And it's so important. And what you're going to hear me say throughout this whole conversation is we as women need to celebrate that our bodies are amazing. There's not many organs, but those organs, once you start getting your period, just work automatically. Okay, so if I can do this correctly, I want to go to the next piece, but I hope you have a good idea about why we get our period. Okay, so I want to give you a little history that we just take for granted. We take for granted we have sanitary pads and we have tampons, and now we have period underwear, which is so amazing. And you know what? It didn't always used to be that way. Back in the ages, they used to make tampons with papyrus or rags. And over here, that they used to give people, take the cells from frogs and help them with cramps. So things way back when have changed dramatically from where we are now. So if you can see this, if I can move it around, this over here, wrong one. Over here is the first it's called a menstrual belt. And we did, way before we had sanitary pads and panty liners, there was a menstrual belt. And back in the 1800s, that was really the first time they created actual sanitary pads. So here's some things that happened in cultures. In the Jewish tradition, when the girl, when she gets her period, can't have intercourse. It's a time in that culture where her body isn't necessarily clean. And a lot of the cultures that I looked into, is they didn't look into the way we look at periods now. We celebrate them. We know that it's an amazing time in a girl's life. And back in certain cultures, they didn't. In the Cherokee culture, they felt it was the most powerful time in a woman's life when they got their period. They would go to the special teepee and they would rest because they felt that during the time that a girl or a woman had her period, she was very, very powerful. So there are cultures that have celebrated it. And then there are cultures who have looked at it like it wasn't very clean, that when we got our period, that there was something wrong with us, that the blood that came out of our body was somehow dirty. And in reality, remember what I said, in many cultures, they have learned that that shedding of the lining is so powerful that you can use it as a fertilizer. I know that may seem a little strange, but that's the way certain cultures look at it. So that's the reason we need to celebrate when we get our period. And I know for ages, people would, sort of cringe at that, but it's really important to understand that what happens to our body is an important thing. It gives us the potential of, having children, and you're going to have your period for a long time. Because remember, if you start menstruating or getting your period around 12, as a rule, periods don't end until around 50. And the only time as a rule you don't get your period is when you're pregnant. So it's important, and that's the beauty of this symposium, is to understand what's going to happen to you and celebrate this. So let's look at some celebrations. Okay. So in the Indian culture, you can see mendis. And so when a girl gets her period, they decorate and they celebrate. And I think it's, first of all, how beautiful is that? And how wonderful to be able to have something that celebrates this rite of passage. And that's what it's called. So in Brazil, when a young girl gets her period, her first period, now this is going to sound very strange in our culture, the whole family gets together and they have a big party and they celebrate her in this rite of passage. In South Africa, they get presents. And in Israel, they eat cakes with honey. And they believe it's a time of sweetness. So I invite you this evening, whether you have gotten your periods or not, I want you to find a way to celebrate. I want you to realize that when you get your periods, whether you've had them or you're going to get them, that this is a rite of passage. This is a time in every woman's or young girl's life where they're moving from being a young girl to being a young woman. And along with your period comes a time of freedom and learning and being the very best you can. And so I think that every woman, every girl, whether you've gotten your periods or not, should find a way to celebrate this time in your life. Because in our culture, we have not, especially in the United States. In the United States, we haven't educated young girls. We haven't given them the information, the tools. We haven't helped moms help their daughters. So my invitation to all young women who are listening not only for you to celebrate when the time comes for you, when you have children and you have a daughter, make sure that you're educated and that you sit your daughter down and really tell her how amazing her bodies are and how amazing this process is in her life. And if you do that, not only will she feel good about this process, but it will give her self-confidence. It will help her self-esteem, yours as well. So I think what periods really are, they're a cycle in every girl and woman's life. And I think it's a time that we look at in a positive way. And every month when it comes, be grateful that our body is working and it enables us to have a period and somewhere down the line, if we choose to have children. But every time I touch this, I am so sorry. Okay, so here's my celebration. So you can make yourself a period cake, okay? So here's the period cake, and it sort of has the reproductive organs on it. I want you to have a big smile on your face, think of a rainbow, and when I think of the sun or the moon, I want you to think of it shining down on you, and that the moon has a cycle and it's getting you prepared for your next cycle. If I do this. Okay. So that's what a period is. That's why you get a period. And if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. Aileen, is somebody going to throw those out at me?
Earlier, someone asked if moons controlled your periods. So, and I don't think it got answered in the chat yet.
If the moon controls your period. So it's interesting, all the years that I've done this, I've had mothers and who've always said that two things, that they can sort of regulate their periods to the moon sometimes, you know, depending on the cycle. If you look back in the American Indian culture, you know, they didn't have period counters, they didn't have calendars. So when somebody got their period, they looked up at the moon to see what phase or cycle the moon was in. And so I think, you know, I think there is some connection to the moon and women's cycles. Now, also, if you ask women who live in dormitories, you know, or sororities, they all say that they cycle at the same time. And oftentimes when I teach classes, and there's a family that has multiple daughters having their period, they all seem to get it at the same time, which means usually the dad leaves the house for several days during that period of time, because there's a lot of emotional stuff going on. Did that answer your question? I hope so.
Millie asked, how do you know when we have them?
How do you know when you have your period? Well, sometimes you actually know. So remember I said that you have some signs. So you're going to go into puberty. All right. So puberty starts, you need those two hormones, and certain things happen to your body. Probably the first thing is emotional changes. Then your feet gets bigger, you get sweat, you get taller, and then you get your breast buds. And as I said, when you get breast buds, it's usually about 2 years from that point you get your period. So you start to listen to your body, and you will start to feel, you'll start to feel maybe more emotional at certain times of the month. But your actual period, here's one of the biggest if information's about that. So one of the ways you may know your period's coming closer is something called a discharge. A discharge is the lining of the uterus starting to shed. It's not your period. It's just the lining starting to shed. It'll show up on your underpants and it'll look maybe a little yellowish, brownish, clear. It'll be sort of thick. And that's telling you your period's coming closer. The one thing I suggest for all girls, even if you feel it's a while before you're getting your period, is put together a period kit. A period kit that has sanitary pads, panty liners. It has something for cramps that you can actually, there's a little pad you can get that works as a heating pad you can get at CVS. And wipes. And if you, a change of underwear, and make sure that's in your backpack. And make sure you've got a friend, because you may start your period, may not know it, and then maybe you need to borrow her sweater or sweatshirt. The other way you may know is you might start having cramps down in your pelvis, lower pelvis, or in your back, and that might tell you your period's coming soon. Sometimes you don't know when you get it, and you just have to be prepared.
All right, so Amari asks, in the Philippines, how do they celebrate for when they have a period?
From what I saw is a special meal is prepared for them. And again, what I found in many of the cultures, and I suggest if you come from different cultures that you Google this, because I find this so interesting. But in many of the cultures, other than our culture, that there's a family celebration. They don't stay quiet about it. They create a special meal, they do it with the family, and they celebrate. And I think every family should do something like that. So that's what I learned about that particular culture, but it was similar in many cultures.
Another question that was in the chat earlier was, do people still use period blood as fertilizer today?
Are you kidding? When I even mention it, they look at me like I'm crazy, because we even look at the period as something dirty and something that there's an odor and uncomfortable with it. And I think for most people, there's that concept of bleeding. We still have that concept that that blood is bleeding, and it's not. And the material, the blood that actually comes out, I mean, it's cells, it's red blood cells, it's tissue, and it's nutrients. Would I suggest it? Yeah, why not? But we have a problem with that. And that's why we have sanitary pads, and that's why we have panty liners. And I hope everyone knows about period underwear, because period underwear is the most amazing thing for periods. You can Google it, and what it means is you don't have to wear a sanitary pad, or you don't have to wear a panty liner. And if you're concerned about getting your period and don't know when it's coming, you wear these period underwear and you don't have to worry about it. So there's some amazing things that are out there that are going to make your life easier when you get your period. Why don't you ask, if you can, your mothers or your grandmothers what it was like when they got their periods and how different it is for you.
So Marissa Ann currently has her hand up, so she can have the mic to talk.
Sure.
Hi, I just had a quick question. What is puberty?
That's a really, really good question. Very good. Okay. So puberty is the physical and emotional changes that both girls and boys go through to prepare them for being an adult. And for girls especially, it prepares your body for the time that you're going to get pregnant. So that's what puberty is. It takes those two hormones I talked about, and hormones are chemicals in the cells of your body. That's what's in your body, that when they get released, when it's your time to go through puberty, they get released and they let all these changes to occur. The changes like emotional changes and like sweat and getting taller and breasts and finally getting your period. So the puberty starts for girls, and puberty starts younger in girls now. It can be anywhere from 7 years of age to 15 years of age. That's not your periods. And for girls who do it older, it's usually because mom was older when she got her period. So I want you to all ask your moms how old they were when they got their period, or you're participating in a sport like swimming, dance, gymnastics, or running that keeps you very lean. That's puberty.
So Olive asked, do you still get the clear white discharge even if you have your period?
Yes. So, it's something I don't think women talk about, but even once we start getting our period, usually at different times of a month. And I said, I use that term ovulation, and that's halfway through your 28-day cycle. And at that cycle is when you release that egg. And your hormones at that point, from the time your period to your ovulate, your hormones are sort of dipped down a little bit. And then at that halfway point, when you release that egg, your hormones start to go back up again. And we tend to have that whitish, clearish discharge at that particular time. And it's perfectly normal. You'll have it all through your life. And as long as there's no odor or it doesn't itch, all of that is perfectly normal. But if you're not cleaning that part of your anatomy, and oftentimes when I'm teaching hygiene, it's important for girls to wash their privates, the front of their privates with warm water, no soap, and the back of their privates with a little bit of soap and water. So you need to start doing hygiene. But what I don't want you to do is there are some chemicals that you can get, because again, I said people look at that part of our body as somehow dirty. Never put anything in there unless you get it specifically from the doctor.
All right, so I guess these questions can be combined. Millie asked, what does puberty look like? And Christina asked, do you get moody and sleepy?
I should have had a whole thing just on puberty. Okay, so what happens is, again, there's a part of your brain called the pituitary. And when each one of us are ready to go through puberty, it turns on and it releases those two hormones. And those hormones are really preparing literally your body for adulthood and having babies. I'm going to do one little sidebar to explain something. We're living longer now. Your guys are supposed to live to your hundreds. And it wasn't that long ago that people died when they were 40. So your bodies are sort of prepped to start having babies in your later teens, even though it's not going to happen. So puberty is really that preparation for that. So when those hormones are released, yes, one of the first signs you're in puberty is emotional changes. And that's when you come home from school, you've had a long day, and within 3 seconds, you're angry, mad, sad, grumpy, frustrated, hangry, and you usually get angry at somebody in your family. And that it's normal to have those feelings. What I always say, it's not okay to take it out on anyone. And so you have to find positive solutions, like taking a walk, screaming in a pillow, writing in a journal, eating something healthy. So you can control those hormones and the fatigue and the grumpiness and all those things that are coming with going through puberty. And at certain times of the month, you're going to feel more emotions. Now, here's an important fact, and this is going to help you. There's 5 things you need to do to make this easier for you. You need to sleep 8 or 9 hours. You need to get lots and lots of water. You need to eat healthy foods like lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, less junk food. You need exercise every single day because that creates another hormone called endorphin that's going to make you better. And the last one is less electronics. Your brain is growing, and when you on too much electronics, it's going to affect the growth of your brain. If you eat unhealthy, it's going to affect your hormones. It may make you more cranky. It may make your period a little heavier. So eating healthy is the most important thing in getting exercise to make periods and puberty easier.
All right, so these also kind of go hand in hand. So Ariana asks, what type of infections happen if that part of your anatomy gets dirty? And Addie asks, why is the discharge there?
Well, the discharge is the lining of the uterus is really what it is. I mean, when you see the discharge, it's the change in the inside of the uterus goes through different changes all through the month. And during that period of time, closer to the halfway point, you will notice that discharge. And it's just some of that lining starting to shed. It's perfectly normal. What was the first question? I got that. What was the first question?
Oh, sorry. The first question was, what type of infections happen if that part of your anatomy gets dirty?
Okay. Really, you're not going to get, I mean, it's important just to clean that part of your body. But the most important thing where we see most of the infections is how you wipe. And I think most parents have told their children, you always wipe from front to back. I don't know if you realize this. You have 3 openings. I call them the 3 P's. Pee, period, poop. Okay? You do not pee out of your vagina. So if anybody thinks that, it does not exist. Okay? You have a tiny opening right above your vagina. And then that's where you pee. It's called the urethra. You have the vagina and then the digestive waste. And the reason some girls get infections is when they wipe from back to front. You don't want to get any of the digestive waste in the vagina or where you urinate. You need to keep that area clean, and that you should not get an infection. But if anytime you notice a discharge and it has an odor or it itches, then you need to tell mom. But the other thing I want you to do after this symposium, after this class, I want you to share with your mothers what you learned. I want you to communicate, if at all possible, with your moms, because you need to go to them if you have questions.
All right, this will be our last question, guys. So Amari asks, what kind of foods can you eat on your period, and if you can eat junk food?
That is a great question. You're not going to like my answer. So from that halfway point, you do have to be careful of foods. When you drink a lot of caffeine, a lot of sugar, junk foods, sodas, any food like that is going to go into your, what we call your endocrine system, your hormones. And when you're eating a lot of poor foods, they're going to affect your hormones, which is going to affect your mood. And your mood then gets even more cranky. And then you start craving, and it can affect your cramps. It can affect how heavy your period is. So eating properly, remember those 5 things: doing those things is going to make your period easier than if you eat junk food, if you drink a lot of sodas or drink Starbucks. If you eat that kind of food, it's going to affect your period. Thank you. I hope this helped. And I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for coming to speak today, Ms.
You're welcome. And thank you for inviting me.
Wasn't it a fascinating presentation, guys? So actually, I'm gonna pull up some slides for announcements at the end.